Okay, we want to have a discussion of nautical terminology now, just so we're all on the same page, talking wise. Fortunately, your online course has covered a lot of these terms, the bow, the stern, a lot of these, so I won't spend much time with the parts of the boat. Point out that the gunnels, looks like gunwales, but pronounced gunnels, is the top, any place basically where water can come over the boat. The cleat, the bilge. I will stop at freeboard and draft for a discussion of that for a couple of reasons. Freeboard is the amount of boat from the water line to the gunnels. Draft is from the water line to the bottom of the boat, and we should point out that there's two bottoms of the boat. There's this one, which is the keel, which is important, but there's also this one for our boats, the prop, which is going to be your first indication of contacting the ground. So we have to have some idea of how deep this is. I want to do a quick discussion of depth finders. All the boats have depth finders. It's important that you know what the reference is. I would like to set the fleet up with a thing called a keel offset. And a keel offset is I will play with the electronic box on the boat so that when the depth finder reads 0, the prop's going to be hitting the bottom. You may still be 2, 3, 4 feet of water. You don't know. You don't care. Unfortunately, I cannot set the entire fleet that way, so we are currently running with actual water depth. So it'll be the bottom of this prop. You're going to have some idea of where it is. Good news is that for all of our boats, the bottom of the prop is about 2 to 3 feet down. So the takeaway is anytime that you get into 4 to 6 feet of water, you've got to start thinking about the prop. And we got to realize you cannot take off in 5 feet of water. You're going to stick the prop on the bottom. So anytime 4 to 6 feet of water, we start thinking about good level operation to get the boat into deeper water. The other thing about freeboard and draft is that the ratio of the freeboard to draft is a big determining factor on what the wind does to an object on the water. If I have a large freeboard and a very short draft, the boat is basically like a balloon. It's going to get blown around. All of our boats are basically balloons on the water, so you're going to have some idea of what wind will do to that boat, and we will cover that shortly. The other thing to think about is if you're getting up against another or coming close to another object underwater, you have to consider its freeboard and draft, such as a person when we get into the man overboard drill or picking up skiers or whatever. Know that the boat has big freeboard, little draft. The person has a little freeboard, great big draft. They're not affected by the wind nearly as much. So we have to consider that when we're getting the two in the same proximity. Okay, another terminology, here's a bad word, aground. We don't want to do that, but just like accident starts with A, aground starts with A, and that's just basically what you've had. You've just had an accident. I will tell you that if you do anything else than immediately shutting off the motor and making sure your passengers are okay, you're probably about ready to make the situation worse. You got to realize you may be exactly where you want to be. You could be in 20 feet of water with an 18, 19-foot tree stuck through your hull. You could be on a pile of rocks with the damaged hull. You could be, and most likely, sitting on a sandbar or a pile of mud and have not done any damage whatsoever, but if you do the wrong thing, you could cause a lot of damage to the boat. So we're immediately going to shut the motor off, make sure everybody's okay. Take a breath, and then let's just talk about a little bit of general water safety here. We all know that you don't dive into the water without knowing what's down there because we're worried about our neck. Mom and Dad told us that, and we've taught our kids, don't dive in the water unless you know what's down there. I have never thought, a lot of people have never thought about what's down there in the water when you jump in. It's time to start thinking about that for the general safety of your passengers. You could jump in there. One thing that's very bad that has happened, I don't know if you've ever been hiking and stuck your feet in the mud and you can't get your shoe out of the mud. That is a very, very bad thing to happen in 6, 7 feet of water, and it has happened. People have jumped off the boat, stuck their feet in the mud, and that's the last anybody ever saw. We certainly don't want that to happen. You also don't want to jump off the boat and stick something through your foot, like one of these old trees that's deteriorating, stick it up through your foot. So just general safety and caution, let's start thinking about what's in the water before we have our passengers jump over the side. I could certainly see us doing that, getting all excited and running aground and jumping over the side to see what you did and break your ankle on a rock or a tree stump down there. So, motor off, everybody's okay. Get a life jacket on if you can, go over the side and assess the situation. See if the hull is okay. See if the prop is okay, if everything's in good shape. One of our rules is, at Freedom Boat Club, we will never power off of running aground. We're not going to put it in reverse and try to back up after running aground. I don't care how slight it was. There's a couple of reasons. One is you may have done no damage whatsoever, but you're about ready to back this very expensive prop into a rock and tear it up. Another thing to consider is trimming the motor up for shallow water operations or running aground. Two different types of motors we have right here. One we don't have, the course covered, a straight inboard. That has a motor and a shaft and a rudder, and all the water intake comes from right down here in the bottom of the boat. But for all of our boats with both an outboard and an inboard outboard, this little symbol right here represents where all the cooling water for that motor comes in. Here, and the same thing for an outboard. If you trim this up a little ways, back away, and think you've got out of trouble, you take off, and 10 minutes later you burn the motors up. Because all that cooling water comes in there, you suck up mud and dirt, and a marine engine will not shut off for any reason. You'll run it and burn them up. So we don't want to suck up a bunch of mud and dirt in there. Another consideration is on this boat we have, on the outboard, we have the motor, transmission, all in a straight line. I can trim this motor up as high as I want to, up to the anti-cavitation plate, just so long as the operating telltale, which is a little stream of water coming out of there, is still pumping water. You're okay, you're not going to hurt anything. Absolutely, positively and unequivocally not true on an inboard outboard. On an inboard outboard we have the motor sitting right here, the outdrive right here, and right in between the two of them, right there going through the transom, is a yoke, spinning yoke that allows the motor to turn, and it allows it to trim, and it also allows it to tilt all the way up to the trailering range. And as I said, a marine engine will not shut down for any reason. You'll exceed the range of that yoke, crack it, bust it loose, and you'll have a 10-pound hammer swinging, tearing out the back of the boat, catastrophic failure up to and including sinking the boat on the spot. An FBC Plus plan would look real good right about there. So, we have some critical training items that we'll cover again, but for all of the outdrives, inboard, outboard, and a straight outboard, all motors will be fully down before you start. Always run them all the way down before engine starts. The motors will be in the operating range only for all operations. And for an outboard, right on up as high as you want to, just as long as you're producing water. But for an inboard outboard, from fully down trim, our maximum trim ever is going to be 1001, 1002, 1003, a long 3 count. That's it. That's as high as we go. We don't care what the gauge says. Don't care anything else. That's as high as we go. If that doesn't get you out of shallow water or grounding, then you got no choice but to shut it off, trim it all the way up, either push out or get towed out to deeper water. Okay? So, if we determine that the prop's in good shape, the hull's in good shape and everything, you've probably been talking to us. If you can get the boat free, push it out. You can drop it down. If the outboard is still producing cooling water, or we'll tell you to watch the inboard outboard to make sure the temperature doesn't start rising. And if it doesn't, then you're probably good to go ahead and complete your day. We're going to ask you to remind the dockmaster when he gets back that you had a grounding so that we can put it up and check the status of the hull, make sure everything's okay. But running around, we're going to show you some ways to not do that. Okay, general talk of just nautical terminology. I will refer to the relative position of another vessel. I will refer to it as either being ahead of us, astern of us, or behind us. I'll also refer to its position with a bearing and a range. Now, bearing is a line from me to something else. It can have several references. If we're using a magnetic compass, we'll be using a magnetic bearing. If we're using a GPS or doing offshore plotting, we'll probably be converting it to a true bearing. but for us and driving around the boat every day, the one we consider important is the relative bearing, and it's always from the bow of the boat. A quick discussion on bearings. Bearings can stay still or they can move. Bearings will shift, and a bearing will increase in a clockwise direction from 0, 0, 0, 0, 9, 0, 1, 8, 0. And I'll refer to that as an increasing bearing. They decrease in a counterclockwise direction from 360, 270 to 180, and I'll refer to that as a decreasing bearing. If I combine that with range, how far away the object is, if something has an increasing bearing, decreasing range, it's going to pass off our starboard side. Decreasing bearing, decreasing range, going to pass off our port side. Both of those good things. The one that we get concerned with is a constant bearing, decreasing range. And that means it doesn't matter what part of another object I'm looking at, what part of the boat, it doesn't matter where it is. If it is on your windscreen, we'll say, and it stays on the same bearing, constant bearing and decreasing range means you are going to wind up in the same position. And that is the ultimate definition of an imminent risk of collision, and that's important. So constant bearing, decreasing range is a big thing. Just a couple more general terminology. Rode is not misspelled. That is the amount of line and chain between you and the anchor. Capsize is to turn a boat over. You can do that on just about every boat. A lot of people think tri-tunes, you can't. That is not true. You can turn a tri-tune over, and it happened recently. The thing to know about our tri-tunes though is they're very stable platforms. They just cut through the waves. They don't bounce anything, not like a normal boat at all. Very comfortable ride. But you got to remember they're still boats. You still have to distribute your weight. You can't have everybody up on the front of the bow. You got to distribute your weight correctly. And if a tri-tune starts hopping with the waves, you're really almost standing yourself in danger, because if the bow digs in, it is violent on a tri-tune. It doesn't bounce back up, it dives in. The waves may come over your passengers in front. So you got to still treat those tri-tunes as vessels and distribute the weight and operate them correctly. Swamp is to fill a boat with water. That is something that you can do to somebody else if you throw an improper wake, and we'll show you how to avoid that in a little bit. And swamp is something you can do to yourself if you ever anchor off the stern of a boat only. Never single anchor off the stern. Always anchor off the bow so we can ride into the waves. A spring line has two terms. One term is using a line tied crossways to allow a boat to move up and down with rapid changes in water level and not move. The other term is using a line to spring a boat on or off of a dock. The course covered this, and I am going to take exception to what the course said. The course said to tie a line to the boat and tie a line to the dock. Use the power with a fender in between the boat and the dock to power the boat to the dock. It's got no choice but to pull in. Problem is, everything you're telling that boat to do is drive through the dock. The line breaks, cleat breaks, fender pops out, you can do some damage to the boat. So if you have to use it, go ahead, but I highly recommend you don't use it. The other thing that we will practice in your on-water orientation is using a reverse spring line, and that is tying a line to the dock, tying a line to the boat, and using reverse power to either pull the boat to the dock or swing the boat away from the dock. Now everything the boat is told to do is go away from the dock. Line breaks or something else. So your dock end will tie a line to the dock to the boat, use reverse, and bring it in. And we'll cover the procedure for that on the on-water portion. And that's called a spring line. Very, very handy. The other term left over here is underway. We've actually already covered that. Underway means you're not anchored, you're not tied to the shore, and you haven't run aground. It's important in two times. One being, we've already discussed the life jackets for anyone under 13 years of age. And the other one is lighting at night. Other than that, that's about what we use for underway. follow with those nautical rules.